And we're live. Hello, everyone. Welcome to our Curious Leaders Path. I am here with Todd and Katrina, and we're here to talk about some stuff that's been happening recently in Canada, which is, what wisdom stirs within us from the forest fires. And I think this it's a for me the topic of the forest fires and what's been happening is something that's really stirred up some stuff within myself, and I'm sure it stirred up some things with others as well. And so I get really curious as to how do we react from this aspect when these things come to us. And so I was really curious, and that's why I wanted to kind of like talk about this together, to start exploring, like, how does it show up within us and our teams and the wisdom that we may have around this. And so when we were talking, and by the way, hey guys, I am in the Netherlands. I'm in Amsterdam. Woohoo!
I'm
So
jealous.
and yeah, and so I've had a drink, so I'm having a good time. It's still light outside, going out afterwards. So hey, hi. um, but yeah, sorry. But so I started to kind of get really curious and wanted to talk about with you guys when we were talking about it is this self empowerment, right? Because
Yeah.
this aligns a lot to self empowerment, and so we started to talk about that term, and I was very much going, well, what the heck is self empowerment? I started to research it. So I'm curious, Todd and Kat, what's your definition of self empowerment?
Mm. Kat, do you want to go first?
Sure, thanks.
Okay.
um, I had a really hard time sort of narrowing this down. Joanne, you had written to us at some point in time that it's a conscious choice to change our destiny or something like that. And I think that was one of the definitions that you found online. And I would say it's our conscious choice to change our path, not our destiny. Because
Mhm.
I personally don't believe in destiny. I don't believe anything is destined. I think we can change most things about ourselves. Maybe not hair color and eye color, but we can change most things in our lives. Yeah, if we're willing to do the work. And it's sometimes incredibly hard, but we can change. With that idea that a lot of things about ourselves are changeable, transformable, that sort of brings in this word self effectuation that I like so much, which is, a lot of people talk about confidence, and confidence to me is kind of an airy fairy transient word. I don't think confidence, I mean, there's confidence is necessary. I'm not saying that we don't need confidence, but too often when people talk about confidence, it's just that short term feeling of, I can do it. Right.
Mhm.
But what we actually need is self efficacy, which is, I can figure it out. It's a really different sentiment. And it's basically saying, I figured out hard things in the past. I can therefore figure out hard things in the future. It may be hard. It may require help. It might require a lot of work. It might require a lot of failures along the way, but I'm going to learn, right?
Hmm.
So when we come to what is self empowerment, I really like this term self efficacy. I can't even say it, self effectuation,
Yeah.
or self efficacy. It is self efficacy. That's why I'm tripping over it. It's self efficacy. Like,
Yeah.
how do we actually foster self efficacy so that we can figure out what do we care about and what can we do and how do we align ourselves with the people where we can actually start making a change.
Yeah. I
Mm.
I love that. I think that's really good. I think my answer might be a little more um it's less brainy. Uh,
We love Kat because she's brainy.
well, well, and it's funny because I was pondering it when you were thinking or when we were talking about it, like what is self-empowerment and when have I experienced self-empowerment? And for me, I want to go back to something that's pretty recent in my life, right? Like the coaching training that I've been going through, and the first thing that popped into my head is all people are naturally creative, resourceful, and whole.
Mm.
Mm,
And but not all people recognize that they are naturally creative, resourceful, and whole. Most of us, myself included, thought, and many of us, myself included, think that we're broken, and that something needs to be fixed and right. But if I can really lean into my natural creativity, resourcefulness, and wholeness in whatever it is, with what I show up in the moment, with all of those resources, with all of those things, then that's a really powerful place to start from. And it's a really powerful place to make decisions from. So for me, that's when self-empowerment happened. And really that's when I was able to make some of the most impactful career decisions in my life, was from that space, from realizing, no, I don't need more. I've got it. I'm enough. And that's been a really powerful mindset.
Well, it's interesting because when you guys were talking, I had something different in mind, but really I want to point us to something that self-empowerment shows up in adverse times for me. It's
Mm,
actually pretty interesting. Like I didn't really think about it until we actually started talking, and that's where it's very clear in my mind when my choices become really clear, when I'm up against adverse situations or situations which I find maybe more challenging. And that's where it's very clear in my mind, do I want to go here or do I want to go here?
mm,
And I then start to decide, where do I want to go next? So that's that. So when I think of self empowerment and where it shows up for me, I know that's not the definition, but Kat, you talked about the definition, and I agree with both of you. And it was interesting to me how apparent it is when I'm faced with adversity, as like the forest fires. I could just feel it within me, and I could feel all of this emotion kind of stirring within me
mm,
because I've not felt it as strong, right? When I
mm.
started thinking about the when I started to experience, it's not thinking or seeing. We were talking about this as well, right? It's like we've seen forest fires, we've seen floods, we've seen all these things all over the world, but for us, we don't experience it, right? Where we're sitting
In
outside.
Toronto. In
Yeah,
Toronto,
like
normally.
in
Yeah.
Toronto, or even folks in New York I was talking to as well, and
Yeah.
in
Yeah.
DC, who are all of a sudden they're really feeling it. We could smell the campfire. I mean, I know I was, I could
Yeah.
feel it in my throat and all the other stuff, right? Yeah, so yeah, it's you really, it really
Mm.
hits you. It hit me in the face like hugely.
Well, it's so interesting, Joanne, because what comes to me as you say that is, and maybe I'm wrong, but what comes to me as you say that is that the self-empowerment um, comes along with sort of the fear that comes with adversity. Like they go hand in hand.
Hmm.
Does that
Yeah,
make sense?
possibly. Yeah, possibly for me.
Hmm.
I know it shows up in different spaces, but I think I see it more when fear it comes alive, right?
Yeah.
Or it's more this strong feeling of being alive, right?
Mm.
Wow.
So, and is that in survival mode if I'm
Right.
fearful or something, or I'm passionate and I'm loving something, or is it
Right.
that both of those, that's where I see it or feel it? Yeah, I would sit there and
Mm.
say yes.
Aliveness.
Yeah, alive, being alive. It's the feeling of aliveness in me, feeling
Yeah.
present, feeling, yeah.
Well,
So the question, like, it's interesting, right? Because we were talking about this too earlier, is like, how do people find it, right?
mhm.
And so not everyone is aware of it, right? So how do they find it? How did you guys find self-empowerment for you, or self-efficacy? If I said it right. Yeah. How did you find it?
um,
It's like,
for
what did you choose for you, like
No, you know what?
your own
To,
choices.
to be very personal about it, for
Yeah.
me, it was about a crescendo of anxiety and not wanting to be in that space and not wanting to live in that space. And ultimately, it's it's that classic change cycle, right? Like either I can continue on this path, which will not lead me anywhere good, but
Mhm.
it's the path that I'm on, or I can choose to do something hard and try to change. And what are the resources and what are the tools that I have at my disposal? And when I first made that decision, I realized I had very few tools and resources at my disposal, and I needed to learn some. I needed to open my brain up. I needed to talk to people. And some of the people that I talk to are the beautiful, wonderful people that are on this call with me right now, and among many others. And with through connections with folks like you and other people, I was able to come into my own self-empowerment. I was able to sort of recognize, oh, you know what, actually, I do have choice. I have agency. I have the ability to make choices for myself. I don't have to be a prisoner of anything if I don't choose to be. That's not the situation that we're in right now. And even when we're facing something as huge and scary and enormous as the forest fires that coated eastern North America in smoke, right? Like there are still options, there are still things that we like. There's still agency there. There's still choices, right? Like we can ignore it or not. And ignoring it like right, for me it's the same thing.
Yeah.
It's right, I can ignore my anxiety, I can ignore what it's doing to me, and I can ignore how it's paralyzing me, or I can do something about it.
Well, you can ignore it until you can't.
Well, yes,
We can ignore the environment until we
until we
can't.
can't.
Right.
Yeah.
That's
And
absolutely
because I'm sitting in Toronto, I'm going to put it in Toronto-centric ways. Is like we've been able to ignore everything about climate crisis, droughts, floods,
Mhm.
fires, God knows what, tornadoes. Because sitting in Toronto, we don't have any of those things, so we can ignore it. We can go use all our disposable stuff and drive as much as we want, and
Mhm.
invest in companies that are not paying for the natural resources they extract or the damage they do. Right? Like
Mhm.
we have that opportunity, but the smoke was the first time we've had to realize,
Mhm.
oh, maybe we can't ignore it too much longer.
Mhm.
It's Todd, what you're describing of not having enough of the tools, and not really having to claim self-empowerment or develop or choose it, I
Mhm.
think is actually very, very normal for most Canadians, most North Americans.
Mhm.
I want to be careful how I say this because obviously within North America, there's a lot of people who don't have the privilege that we do.
Of course.
But, we grew up in a very, very stable and increasingly wealthy world.
Mhm.
The Cold War ended when we were teenagers or younger. Um, the middle class got bigger, life got better, everything got better for us in our lifetime. So for North Americans, we've had the luxury of being very, very soft and really
Mhm.
just, you know, looking at looking at the world really as opportunity and nothing but opportunity. We could avoid most threats for most of us that have enough privilege.
Mhm.
But then there's also people who grew up in war zones or troubled areas, or define trouble in any way you want.
Mhm.
Or there's those of us that come from parents who had lived through war. And I grew up, my bedtime stories were war stories. So for me, this idea of self-empowerment has always been there.
Mhm.
It's always been, you always have to find a way to survive. The problem is I never learned that thriving piece. That's not part of my family culture.
Mhm.
So survival is very much my mindset, which means self-empowerment. You got to figure out how to do things. I'm also very lucky that I grew up in a small town, redneck town in BC, beautiful place, mostly really good people, lots of outdoorsy stuff. And it basically was a place where not most people were not poor, but we also weren't super wealthy, but not in
Mhm.
a bad way. It's just we didn't have all the latest toys, all the latest fashions, and we didn't actually even want them all that much for most people,
Mhm.
because we ended up being very creative. Like a lot of the girls learned to sew not because they really wanted to be seamstresses, but because they wanted to, they saw something that they thought was really cool fashion wise and they made it themselves. Um, we learned how to cook because, we didn't really have a lot of restaurants or anything. So if we saw something in a magazine, because this was long before internet, we learned how to do things. So I'm lucky that I've had both a positive and the negative incentive for self-empowerment. And I would assume a lot of people on our call or on, who are joining us or listening to
Mhm.
this will probably also come from that. So there's some people who didn't have to choose self-empowerment, and there's some people who had to.
Mhm.
And the difference, I think, and I think there's much more nuance, but for those people who didn't have to do self-empowerment, they have to learn the skills of it. And I would suggest those of us that grew up with self-empowerment in the survival mindset, not necessarily the entrepreneurial thriving mindset, is we actually have to intentionally choose the thriving perspective, even in light of the calamities that we're facing, geopolitical conflicts, environmental, the environment basically going to hell. We have lots of things to choose from because there's so many places where things are just pretty well blowing up. So
Yeah. That's so interesting and so poignant too. And I hadn't considered it quite that way. That's really interesting. I'd love to bring in what Bruno just put into the
Yeah, I was
chat
looking at
too,
you. Yeah.
right? About sort of his observation, and thank you for that, Bruno. His observation that his son, his very young son, is experiencing the world very differently, right? And
Yeah.
curiosity rather than fear is the default. And how beautiful is that? Because I think that's also the thing. I mean, here we are on the podcast called the Curious Leaders Path, right? So we know that curiosity is an important element in this, and will be an important element in this as well. Yeah.
What comes up for me is I think innately it's curiosity, right, versus the fear.
Yeah.
And I think that I've come from this sort of like this fear-based kind of world, right? Not knowing what the other shoe will drop, seeking a place of safety and so forth. So, and I think that's where self-empowerment has come from for me, is that once I see fear, then I become very, ooh, what was that? Oh, I felt that. Like, so I become really curious about what it is. And I think that's, for me, all the things that I've done in terms of trying to listen to my own self, and and trying to decipher and settle my mind and decipher what's going on and everything like that, centering myself a lot, has been able to kind of make me understand that these thoughts that I have are just made up based on these feelings that I've had, based on this sight that I've had. Like I mean, all these things are things I'm now seeing so much more, so that when the fear comes up and everything like that, I'm able to kind of go, oh, okay, this is what's actually happening for me. And now because I can see that, it's so empowering. It's so empowering, right? Because now I can see how my mind thinks, which is all beautiful. It's not bad. It's not wrong. It's just our humanity and who we are. We're created this way, right? What a great gift, right? And it's upon recognizing what it is and what it's capable of doing, that we can start now seeing it for what it is, for as much as we can. It's hard. Huge onion. I can't see everything, but I can certainly feel and see so many things. But the more that we can understand it, the more that we can make the choices, right, that we want to get towards. So if we go into this aspect of adversity and self-empowerment, what comes up for you guys in terms of what's important about having self-empowerment during adversity or adverse times? Because this is something that I think we need to bring into our workplaces as well. But starting from us, right? How does it start from us, right? So
I think we have to model it, and we have to get really comfortable with it, and we have to find ways to be healthier with it. So I'm coming in from the perspective, that I assume everybody is curious. Because curiosity for me, basically, I mean, this is a bit dramatic, but curiosity, I'm going to say, saved my life. Because if I wasn't curious, if I wasn't self-empowered, I'm not quite so sure I would be here today. And I'm not saying that gratuitously. The problem with that, with me being so curious and really having such a strong internal locus of control, believing that I'm responsible. Often I believe I'm responsible for too many things. But the problem is then when I interact with other people, I'm expecting them to be close to where I am. And, that doesn't work, because then I just basically annoy them, right? Or I anger them, or I threaten them, or whatever. Not intentionally, but that's sort of the result. So I think a lot of what we have to do is really become comfortable with it ourselves, recognize where we're at, recognize where other people are at, and then find ways to ramp up our self-empowerment, which, curiosity, becoming comfortable with experimenting, connecting with ourself, Joanne, what you were talking about, really starting to become comfortable and aware of the emotions that we've got, as well as doing that with other people as well. To me, those are sort of the steps that we need to take, and then recognize some people are not going to come to it naturally. And that took me a long time I still haven't learned it, quite honestly.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think I love that, because I think you're right. I think there's like, it starts with modeling it, and it starts with refining it, and it's uncomfortable, and it's becoming comfortable with the uncomfortable, and and from a team perspective, and from, like, what does that mean, modeling it? Why is it important? And I just want to go to what Izzy brought into the chat, because then it really is an opportunity to cultivate that growth mindset in other people, and it doesn't need to be huge, does it? It just needs to be, can I crack it open just this much, and see what can pop in, see what can go in, because once it's open just a little tiny bit, then a natural creativity and a natural curiosity can probably take over. So it doesn't need to be monumental, but it does need to exist, and it needs to be intentional.
And I wonder, sorry, Joanne, let me just throw in one more thing really quickly. I wonder if we can do that with humor as well. Like, make it more of it, like, this is so not part of my natural way of being. This is something I'm having to think a lot about. How do we gamify? Like, I'm genetically German. I'm not supposed to be humorous. So
I'm with a bunch of Germans here. Yeah, I think you have more fun.
You're among friends.
Yeah, no.
So, how do we bring in fun? How do we bring in joy? How do we gamify it? Like, yeah, I think there's another, and Todd, I think that's more, I think you're closer to being able to do that, but that's sort of what I was hearing in the back of my mind based on the conversations that we've had, because you're very serious. You're, absolutely focused, and you also bring in the joy and the humor too. So anyway, sorry, Joanne.
Yeah, no, what comes up for me, which is really interesting, was as you guys are talking, these things come to me as well. Oh yeah. Well, listen, we've survived because we've been going through adversity. The human species survived because of all the adversity that we've actually gone through. Right. Yeah. And it just makes me think that, we're not trying to create anything new, right? There's nothing, we've done this in the past, sort of thing. It's, and there's two thoughts that come up in my mind. One is the adversity stuff that we've faced in the past may have been more of a survival mode related stuff, and right in your face, right? And it's more of a quick, rapid change than a slow change that we're finding right now. Like, we're like, that boiling lobster, that boiling frog, or whatever is happening right now. So I think there's this aspect that in the past we were able to kind of like gamify it. I mean, people will sing, right? They'll kind of like, they'll beat the drums, they'll do whatever, but there's always like we've had like the songs, the tribal songs, or whatever the case may be, that will keep us going and everything like that. But in even some cases, that may not be the case all the time, but I'm sure that there's some sort of humor or banding together that kind of allowed us to kind of do that. And that connection is great as well. I think the challenge that we have today is that, and we were talking about this before, is that there's so many changes which are happening, and they're not in our face. We see them happening, but they're not like, that's why I think the fires is a great example for me anyways, because this is nothing I've experienced before in my life. Right. So, and if we're experiencing this one thing, I'm sure that we're going to be seeing more and more of these things, and they're going to be hitting us faster and faster
and harder.
So people may not be necessarily moving through or growing in adversity. Right? They're just like going, okay, it'll be fine. What the winds have taken away. We're okay now. We'll sit back. We're doing okay. Right?
Time to go sit on a patio, and
the winds have changed for us, but you know what? They've gone to somewhere else.
Exactly.
Right? And that's sad.
And
right?
the fires are still burning.
I'm great, but someone else is. So, just because it's no longer there, now we go, okay, it's someone else's. Right? It's not my problem. It's theirs. Right? No. I mean, we need to kind of like, we need to do something about it, right? But I do know that, like, within our teams, within the organizations that we're in right now, people are thinking about it. And the best
Hmm.
thing I think that we need to do within our teams is start to talk about it, right? And
Hmm.
because someone's feeling it and they're bringing it
Yes.
into their work and they're unable to focus, just like through COVID, we saw a
Hmm.
lot of mental health issues,
Mhm.
right?
Hmm.
And so, yes, the forest fires is one, but we're going to be facing more and more of these, right?
Hmm.
And we need to start having conversations about how we want to be in this particular
Yeah.
space. Yeah.
Climate anxiety is a real thing.
Mm,
It's a very, very real thing, and
yeah.
lots of us are experiencing it, and lots of members of our teams are experiencing it.
Yeah.
And I think you're right. Like
But
I think
isn't
that's
empowerment
so
kind of the
wise.
opposite of anxiety? Like, isn't
Yes.
choosing empowerment, isn't that,
Yes.
It,
and it
it,
doesn't
it,
mean we're not going to feel anxious, but
it is, Kat. And I think that the curious leader, if you will, has an opportunity to address that.
exactly.
So how, like, what is that opportunity, and what is the way that we want to address it? And I think that, Joanne, you've hit on something really good, because to start off, it really can be something as simple as, let's talk about it.
Yeah.
What shows up? What's here for you right now? What's here for the rest of us right now? Because the thing that's really cool, and I think that it's implicit in something like a growth mindset or an open mindset or being curious, something that makes that easier is community.
Hmm.
Oh, hugely.
Right. So when
Hugely.
it's not just me, when it's oh, it's also you, and it's also you, and it's you over
Right.
there, and it's you over there, well, then all of a sudden it's not just, four minds or five minds or 10 or 20, right? It's like it's a crescendo of people who are applying curiosity in the face of something that seems terrible.
Yeah.
And how amazingly powerful could that be?
Yeah. That it was interesting. I tell you just a quick story because I know we got to be wrapping up. But
Yeah.
when I was doing a check in with a bunch of people during COVID, and we did a bunch of
Yep.
I did a bunch of classes and stuff like that, and one guy came in and he was so grateful. And when you talk about community, he goes, I was unable, and he was teary because he goes, I was unable to talk about this at home
Hmm.
because I'm the leader of the family. I'm unable to do this, but now he was given a space
Yeah.
where he can have that conversation,
Hmm.
right? And so, yes, we need to be able to have that kind of conversations,
Hmm.
and people are really grateful for it. They really
Yeah.
are, right? And it bonds the community more, right?
Yeah.
And by the way, my friend Sath is here from Scotland, and he's on the call too. And we're going to do
Is
a
that?
retro of the call afterwards.
Oh, that's awesome. I can't wait. I can't wait to hear how that goes.
Yeah, Scotland and Joe. Yeah, Sath
That's
and
going to be a lot
Joe
of
and
fun.
Scott and Sath are here, which is
Oh,
wonderful. So
fabulous.
nice to see
Fantastic.
him here. Yeah.
Yeah.
So
So,
just I wonder if we can just wrap up really
yeah.
quick. So what I've heard, or sort of what I've made notes on of what we talked about, is I think it really is connecting with self and others first. And sort of to echo what you were talking about, Joanne, it's really acknowledge your emotions and be honest with your emotions and accept them and don't try to deny them, right? I mean, fear is natural. But if we then add the curiosity element, which is what Bruno was pointing out, curiosity has actually been shown to be one of the best antidotes to any type of emotional overwhelm. I mean, within reason, of course. I mean, there's sometimes where you're just overwhelmed.
Mhm.
But sort of then really choosing curiosity and choosing the things that you really care about. And curiosity is sort of organizing what you're thinking, organizing what you know, organizing what you understand, then identify the gaps that you're really interested in, look for insights, not just information, but insights, and then restructure what you know. And eventually you can then start finding things where you can take action, where you can really use your agency I mean, you've got agency through all this, but really starting to choose places where you can actually act on things,
Mhm.
ideally with other people, and experiment. One thing we didn't talk about on the call, but I know that we've talked about it otherwise, is also experiment and see what
Yeah.
does work. Because we don't have answers. We're not going to find answers. We have to create completely new ways of doing things.
Mm,
Yeah. So does that sort of cover the things that we talked about? And
I think so. I think it does, and I think it's a good it's a good way to wrap us up too, because I think the thing that I'm walking away from this conversation with is a feeling of there is something, like, I do have a responsibility, and I have the ability and the agency to respond to it. I
Yeah.
am enough, and I can create something that's important to me. And if it's important to me, it's going to be important to other people too.
Yeah.
Mhm.
And I mean, that creates its own joy, that creates its
Mhm.
own sense of fulfillment and sense of
Purpose.
meaning and
Yeah.
purpose. Exactly.
Mhm.
And that actually becomes a really joyful thing. And having
Yeah.
that community, again, Joanne, you were talking about
Yeah.
this,
Yeah.
having the community of like-minded people is really powerful, and it's
Yeah.
fun, and maybe then we can make up new songs and dances that, instead of a rain dance, maybe it would be a rain dance, an anti-fire
Yep.
dance, and a
Yep.
anti-flood dance, and whatever. Maybe
That would be awesome. If that
I would
works,
like that very much.
we got to
Yeah.
send an email to Dua Lipa.
Uh,
that feeling of belonging really
Exactly.
matters.
It
Right?
does.
Really
It
important.
does. And
Yeah.
and that's the theme that we've touched on in other episodes as well, right? Like that connection, that feeling of belonging, that
Mhm.
sense, like it's not just me, it's me
Yeah.
and it's us.
Yeah.
It's all of us together, because especially when we're dealing with something like climate, it
Yeah.
really is all of us together.
Yeah.
Yeah,
And the next session that we're doing is around power, is it not?
I think
Yeah.
it
We're going
is.
into power
Yeah.
again.
We're going into a
Yes.
power cycle. It's gonna be fun.
We're going into power cycle.
Awesome.
Well, stay tuned. That would be
Yeah.
a great session in 2 weeks' time. But thank
Indeed.
you guys.
It was a real pleasure.
It
Yeah.
always is. Thank you so
All right.
much.
Thank
Thanks.
you, everybody.
And thank you. Yes, thank you
Yeah.
everyone for joining us. All right.
See ya.
Thank
Bye
you.
then.
Bye. Bye.